Welcome to this quick video tutorial on how to create a sectional drawing in Rhino. In this video I'm going to be using this simple building model here and the landscape around it to create a sectional drawing of this model. To do this you can cut a section of your model in a couple of different ways. The most basic way is actually just by selecting the model and typing in section into your command line. This section command allows you to draw a line through a model like so, and it creates a sectional drawing from that line. Now what you'll find is this is very much just a cross section of the model. It only draws out the thing that's being cut, but we can't see anything behind that cut line and we can't see anything in the elevation of our model. Because of this, I don't often use this technique unless I'm trying to create lots of quick cross sections through my model. The majority of the time when creating a section I'll use the clipping plane command, and this can be found by typing in clipping plane into the command line like so. To use the clipping plane, you can draw out a rectangle in your scene and you can move that rectangle into position to cut the model in a particular place. As you can see, it's face down at the moment, but if I use these little anchors on the gumball and hold that shift key, I can rotate it and then move it to cut a section through the model like so. And there we've got our section line. Once you've kind of located your section, you then want to align the camera in order to see that section as a kind of nice orthographic drawing view. To do this, I'm going to go back to my views and we're going to find the view that best aligns with this particular section cut. Now you see here the front view is kind of the wrong angle, so if you want to switch that, you can just click on the drop down, go to set view, and we'll click the right hand view this time, and there you can see that now is in the same alignment as my clipping plane. You'll notice that sometimes in these views the object isn't cut like it is in the perspective view we set it up in. In order for this to be cut, we need to select the clipping plane again, go to our properties, and under the clipping plane properties here you'll find it's got the views being clipped, and we need to tick a box in the view that we want to be clipped. So if you click on right there, you'll then see that that's now being cut like our kind of view in the perspective. Now it might be that your clipping plane actually isn't on one of these kind of like orthographic or right angle projections. It might be that, let's say, our clipping plane is actually at a slight angle like this. In which case what you'll find is that it doesn't align with the right view, it doesn't align with the front view or back view, and we might need to create a new view to properly align to that clipping plane. Now if this is the case, a quick way to create this view and align it perfectly to the face of our clipping plane is to go to our object creation tool on the left, and we're going to create a surface that matches the orientation of that clipping plane. Usually I just use the vertical plane tool here. We'll snap to the midpoint of our plane and then just anywhere along that plane, just using that near snap, and I'm just going to make a plane like so. Doesn't really matter kind of how big that plane is, as long as it's matching the orientation of our clipping plane like so. Then what we're going to do is we're going to switch our perspective projection to parallel to allow the view to be flat, and we're going to go to view, set camera, and orient camera to surface. This will allow us to orientate our camera to match this particular surface we've drawn. So we're going to select that, we're going to select our surface, and then you'll see on that surface is a very small arrow which sets the direction that the camera is going to be set to. Now it's often quite hard to see this arrow because it's the same color as the object we're using. So usually I just left click and see where the camera takes me. It might be the right way or it might be reversed from what I want. So if we left click now, there you can see the camera is in the right orientation, but it's the opposite of what I want. It's looking the wrong way. If this happens to you, just repeat the command, going back, select the plane again, but this time select flip and left click. And there you'll find it's now orientated to the right orientation, and we're flat now to that sectional cut that's being aligned to our kind of clipping plane. When you do that, you can delete your surface. We don't need that anymore. And then if you want to make sure you don't lose that view, you can always go to view, set view, named views, and save it out in that way as well. So that's just a quick way in case your kind of camera or your clipping plane isn't at a nice right angle. That's how you align your view to that clipping plane. Now for this particular example, we're going to go back, and we're actually going to just go back with the standard projection we had originally. So we'll reverse it back around, and we're going to align it in that kind of right hand view like we set here. Now once you've got your view aligned and you're kind of happy with that cut line, what we're going to do is, as said before, we're going to save that as a named view, just so we don't lose it out, and we're just going to call it section in this case. This will make sure if you need to align up any other layers of your section, it might be that you're rendering shadows later, or you update the line work and want to re-update it again in your drawings, we can get back to that view again and we haven't lost our section cut. Once you've got that saved, I'm just going to dock it on the side here, we're then going to create our drawing from this section. Now you can do this in a couple of ways. You can always switch to something like the pen mode and take the drawing directly from there. But what I like to do is use the make 2D command. This allows me to get a vector line work for this section, which I can then edit up either in Rhino or Illustrator to add more detail into my model and into my kind of particular drawing. So it's kind of best if you know you want to add more detail in to do a make 2D. When doing this, make sure you maintain the source layers and you also maintain that clipping plane intersection. This is really key because it will extract out the cut line or the section cut that you have in your model, which means we can give it a different line weight, we can add a fill color really easily to it, and it just makes it a lot easier to edit after we've cut the particular drawing. So once you've selected those two options, we're going to hit OK, and it will then create our 2D drawing. You can find that by going back to the top view, and there we have our sectional drawing here. What you'll also find is in layers we now have these make 2D layers where all of these line works will be kind of contained. Once we've got that, you can either add all your line weights and start to work that up in Rhino, or you can use another program like Illustrator to do that. For this particular tutorial, I'm going to export this out to Illustrator to work up my line work, and we can do that just by going to File, Export Selected, and then we're going to save that out as an Illustrator file. Just by going down here, choosing Illustrator, and then we'll just call this section and hit save. When doing this, it might be that you want a very particular scale of your model, or you might just want to take a snapshot of the current view. You can set the scale here, or you can just do a snapshot which won't scale the model but will keep everything in proportion for you as well. You might find when you preserve the model scale it's quite hard to see in your Illustrator file when you open it. If you find that, you just need to move this model to the center point of your Rhino file and then it should appear in your Illustrator file as well. For the time being, I'm just going to do a snapshot of the current view and hit OK to save that out. We're now going to move into Illustrator to start to work up this line work. Now I've opened this drawing up in Illustrator and you can see that we've got the drawing in the center of my kind of artboard here, and we've got a series of layers here which correspond to the layers I had in Rhino. Any layers with this clipping plane intersection are essentially my sort of cut or my section layers. So if I turn the others off, you'll see that we've got a nice kind of clean section line there to work with, and then we have all our elevation lines here. What I usually do when I start working on a drawing like this is just change in the document setup, change the size of the artboard to be whatever size I need. For this we're just going to do a landscape A3 page like so, and when you're happy you can just click off like that. And then we can also customize the size of the drawing to match the artboard. It might be that you exported at a particular scale, which means you might not want to kind of adjust it, but in this case I'm just scaling it up to fit in the middle of that artboard like so. From here I then start to set the line weights of my lines. What I'm going to do first is just make these all one colour, just by selecting all of the lines, either going down here in the bottom left to the kind of fill and stroke, and we're going to click on the stroke option, which is this little outline square, and we're going to give it a colour of a black colour there, just to unify those. What I'll then do is I'm going to go through all of these lines and give them different line weights. We're going to start with our kind of section lines. I'm going to turn off all of the other ones and we're going to make these slightly thicker. For the ground, which is this kind of ground layer, we're going to keep that probably at a point 1.5 here because we want that to be quite a thick line. For the walls, maybe we'll do them less, we'll keep those as a 1, and then for the timber, because it's going to be a bit thinner, we're going to make that a little bit lighter. We're going to make that a 0.75. Might be for these parts as well because they're quite skinny. We'll also make those a 0.75 there. It might be as well that you need to actually tidy up a few of these lines. Maybe you want them to kind of like join together and be a little bit more specific than what you've got in Illustrator, or you took from your Rhino file, sorry. So you might want to kind of go and work into them, adjust some of the lines there just so they look a little bit nicer. What we can then do once we've done those section lines, I'm going to turn those off, turn the other lines on, and we can start to work into the elevation lines. If you want to quickly select lines from a layers in Illustrator, we can click on this little circle here and it will select them. And I'm going to make these all a lot thinner, so they're kind of 0.25. We'll start with a 0.25 on everything actually. And then for some of them, like the glass, we're going to make that even thinner. We'll make that a 0.15, like so. And then we'll turn back the other layers just to check that. And there you can see we've got our section, and then our elevation's a little bit lighter. Now what's sometimes nice, and something you don't get when you bring this from Rhino, is often you'll see a lot of things through the section cut that you wouldn't normally see if you were cutting a proper section. In this case, I actually want to add a fill behind my section line to hide some of these extra little line work that's happening here. To do that, what we're going to do is we'll hide all our layers apart from our clipping plane again. We're going to select those layers and we're going to copy them, just hitting Ctrl C on the keyboard. Then we're going to create a new layer called Section Fill. And we're going to paste all those lines onto that layer using the Paste in Place command, the Shift Ctrl V there, like so. Then we're going to hide the rest of the layers. With that, I'm then going to select all of those lines and we're going to make them into a live paint object. Live paint can be found under the Shape Builder tool here, just by holding left click and finding Live Paint bucket there, or you can find it in Object, Live Paint, and you can make a live paint object here. Once we've clicked that Make, we then have the option to fill in some of these lines. It might be that actually you want to fill in the whole thing black, and I've just triple clicked there to fill that in. We're going to just take out a little bit of that fill in the middle there, like so. And that way we get a nice dark section line on everything if you wanted to kind of make it that sort of drawing. For this particular drawing, I'm not going to make it black, but we're going to make it into a white fill instead. So I'm going to double click here, select white, and again if you triple click with your mouse on all of the area, like so, it will fill everything in white at the same time, and that allows you to kind of add that fill across the whole of your section. Then what we can do is if we move all our section layers and that fill all the way up to the top of our Illustrator file, like so, you'll see that that section fill is then going to obscure some of those lines we've got there and just adds a nice neat fill over the top. If you find like this that it's actually filling in an area it shouldn't have, we need to go back to this fill option, make sure it's got nothing in there, and just fill in a kind of blank fill there. So we'll make sure we're not filling in areas that we don't want the fill. Also, if like this you want to kind of make sure that you kind of don't have some of these lines in that section line that we can see from the timber here, you can also do that by moving some of those timber layers under your section fill line. Now what's going to happen here is if I turn off some of these layers, you'll see that actually my live paint object has a black line attributed to it. We can select it, and in here it's got a black line that's added to that section. If I select that and just hit on the kind of no fill option, it takes away that section line for me. And then when we add our layers on top of that, you'll then see that actually our section is a lot cleaner there, like so. So that's how you might start to clean up your section, just to make it very clear what's being cut and what's not being cut in your model. And we can always change that just by moving things above or below that layer to hide or show what's being cut there. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a little bit more detail into this. We're going to add some of the things that are happening underground here and a little bit more detail into this section, just to kind of give us a bit more to work with. We can do that by looking up certain construction details that you might want to add to your project, or just drawing straight in Illustrator. And often I find it's easier to add detail in the 2D just by drawing into the model afterwards. So I'm going to pause the video, add a little bit more detail to give this section a bit more richness, and then we're going to finish this up by adding some shadows to this. I've now tidied up the drawing a little bit and also added a few new line weights in here. We've got a couple of dotted lines to show things that might be happening behind the section, and also some little bits of animation like people and trees that are just scattered around the drawing just to bring it to life somewhat. I'll put a link to where you can find trees and people like this which you can add into your drawings. Now once you're happy with your kind of section line, we're then going to save it out and export it as a PNG, and as the last step we're going to add a bit of shadow to this section to give it some depth and some three-dimensionality. To export it out, we're just going to go to File, Export, Export As, and then we're going to save it out as a PNG file using the artboard to constrain that image. And then we're going to hit export there and go OK. Once we've got that, we're then going to open that up in Photoshop and we're going to apply a shadow layer which we're going to create from our Rhino model. I'm going to begin by creating my shadow layer. To do this, I've gone back to my Rhino model and found that same section view that we saved out earlier. I'm then going to switch this to a rendered view. And we're going to create a very sharp shadow just by going to the render settings, going down to the render properties, and scrolling down to where it says lighting, and we're going to turn the sunlight on and the skylight off there. So we've got that sun option ticked on and that skylight option ticked off. This is going to create a nice sharp shadow for our scene. You'll notice it's a little bit blurry at the moment, and we can always kind of play around with how sharp that shadow is by customizing our display options. Now, I made a separate video on this where we looked at creating kind of comic book style visuals and also how to do a rendered plan. So it's very much the same technique where we're going to go down to the display options. We're going to create a copy of that rendered viewport mode by going to display modes, selecting rendered and hitting copy there. Then under that copy of the rendered, we're going to hit OK, and we're going to set our view, instead of being on rendered mode, onto our copy of rendered mode. Now at the moment you won't see any particular difference there, and I'm just going to move this clipping plane out of the way for now so it's not kind of caught up in that view, like so. We're going to then go back to the display options, go back to that copy of rendered, and I'm going to go to shadows this time, and we're going to turn on the kind of maximum sharp shadows there, and we're going to make sure that kind of edge quality is set to sharp as well. And there we've got that nice sharp edge going on our shadows. Then we're going to hit OK. If you want to then play around with the direction of that shadow, you can always go to Render Tools, click on the Sun panel there, and under Manual Controls we can then start to kind of play around with exactly what that shadow looks like and where it's coming from. And you can see as I'm kind of moving it around, it's casting it on different sides of the shape. Once you're kind of happy with that, what we're going to do is then go down on the drop down to capture here, and we're going to capture to file. We're going to do this as a custom resolution, make sure it's locked to the viewport, and we're going to set it to around 4000 pixels to keep it nice and sharp. I'm going to keep it just with a solid background there, and then we're going to hit OK. And I'm going to save it out as a JPEG video, like so. There we go. So there we've got our shadow layer, and then we've also got our line work, which we took from Illustrator. To combine these both, I'm going to open up Photoshop to put these two things together. I've begun by opening up my shadow layer directly in Photoshop like this. I'm then going to locate my line work layer and then just drag it and drop it on top like so. What you'll find is that they often won't be aligned, or they won't be the same size. In order to do this, what I usually do is just scale the line work layer up slightly. We're going to find a common point to align these, and for this I'm just going to use the top of this bit of timber work here, like so. Once we've aligned that top corner, I'm then going to take the crosshair from this sort of transform layer. If you can't see this, you just need to select the layer and hit Ctrl T on your keyboard to open up those transform controls. We're going to take that crosshair and we're just going to move it to the top left hand corner of the object, just so it aligns to the point I kind of lined up there. Then if we hold the Alt key down and select any kind of scale part of this transform, you'll see it transforms from that particular point that we selected. All you then need to do is just line it up at another side while holding the Alt key, and I'm just going to line it up along that line there. And there you can see the whole image is now aligned. If, like me, you've got a slight green layer to your kind of rendered layer here, we can always just add in a black and white adjustment layer just to sit between those two, just to make this sort of grey, and then when you add your line work on top you can't see it. Now you can see we've got our line work nicely added on top of the shadow. You might also just want to take a kind of exposure or brightness and contrast layer and just up the brightness of your shadow a little bit, or you can do it on a hue saturation to just make that slightly kind of more faded, like so, if you want it to be a slightly more kind of grey tone to the shadow rather than a really dark black. And sometimes that looks a little bit nicer when you've got a line work drawing like so. Once you're kind of happy with that, I then usually just crop the drawing to be the sort of size that I need it to be. And there we have our kind of finished section drawing. So I hope you found this video tutorial useful on how to create a sectional drawing from a 3D Rhino model and add a kind of nice shadow in the background of that too. If you want to watch any other videos on creating imagery or drawings in Rhino or Photoshop, then please do check out the videos on the channel. Thanks for watching.